The story unfolds on a gloomy morning in a quaint rural town in Maine. David, an illustrator, surveys the aftermath of a bizarre thunderstorm that struck the previous night. The storm had shattered a window, prompting his son Billy to call David and his wife Steph to witness the damage to their lake house. Upon inspection, David discovers that a tree from their neighbor's yard had crashed onto their lake house. While the family contemplates this oddity following a severe thunderstorm, they notice a substantial mist descending from the nearby mountain, a sight that strikes David as unusual. Curious about the fallen tree, David decides to visit his neighbor's yard. Steph, aware of the historical land dispute between David and their neighbor, urges caution. David meets Norton, who is struggling with a malfunctioning chainsaw. David informs Norton of the damage to his property and notices that Norton's car has also been affected. In an unexpected turn of events, Norton asks David for a favor to go into town and procure materials for repairs. David agrees, hoping this gesture will help mend their strained relationship. Accompanied by Norton and Billy, David heads into town where they encounter military personnel and repair vehicles in a convoy. Norton recognizes the soldiers as participants in Project Arrowhead, associated with a nearby military base. He queries David about the project, to which David responds with speculations ranging from crashed alien spacecraft to supernatural beings. The trio then enters a store, where David engages in conversation with store employees Sally and Ollie, who are occupied with a bustling crowd of customers. After expressing gratitude, Norton inquires whether David and he have reconciled, to which David replies that it's too early to say, but they are currently maintaining civility. A group of soldiers enters the store, expressing excitement about leaving town for a brief vacation. Among them, Jessup shares a friendly moment with Sally and greets an elderly woman named Mrs. Repler. Mrs. Repler converses with Billy, inquiring about his experience during the thunderstorm, before delving into her thoughts on the storm and the extensive damage it caused to the town. While Mrs. Repler continues to share her thought, David notices a woman named Amanda, who gives him a flirtatious glance. Norton, on the other hand, spots a military police officer entering the store and conversing with Jessup's group. The wailing sirens of police and fire department vehicles speeding across town can be heard in the background. The military police officer then issues orders to Jessup's group, instructing them to cancel their vacations and return to the base immediately. The entire store falls into silence as sirens blare from the nearby military base. Suddenly, a man named Dan rushes into the store with a bloodied nose, shouting about creatures in the mist that have taken one of his friends. Ollie attempts to calm him down, but he cries out, urging them to lock the store door. One of the shoppers makes a dash for his car, but as the mist rolls in, it engulfs everything, with only faint screams audible from the man. In eerie silence, everyone in the store gazes at the storefront, now obscured by the white mist. Tremors begin to shake the store. The store manager, Bud, advises everyone to stay inside, but a woman insists on going home to her children. Mrs. Carmody, a religious zealot, proclaims that the fog is a harbinger of death and a sign of the apocalypse. David later meets with Mrs. Rep, who introduces him to Amanda, a newcomer to town. He attends to Billy, ensuring his comfort. Ollie, the stork, informs David that he can find blankets in the loading dock. Making his way to the loading dock, David discovers that the store generator is clogged. In the darkness, he hears rattling noises emanating from the store's roll-up door. The banging grows louder, prompting David to rush back into the store, gripped by fear. He encounters Ollie and a few others who are on their way to inspect the generator. David shares his concerns about the noise, but Jim and Norm are determined to proceed, claiming David is condescending due to his fame as an illustrator. David defends himself, emphasizing his concern for everyone's safety, but Jim becomes enraged and threatens it. The roll-up doors suddenly open, and Norm prepares to venture outside. The thick mist envelops them, and the others mock David for his fear of the mist. However, their mockery is short-lived as a massive tentacle emerges from the fog, ensnaring Norm's foot and yanking him outside. In a desperate attempt to rescue Norm, David dives in, while the rest of the men are paralyzed by fear. More tentacles appear, and Ollie rushes to retrieve an axe. The tentacles unfurl, revealing menacing claws that injure Norm, tearing chunks of flesh. Ollie readies himself to sever the tentacle, but it pulls Norm away, causing Ollie to miss his target. Despite Norm's grip, David and Ollie are forced to release him, lest they are also pulled out into the unknown mist by the menacing tentacles. Norm vanishes into the mist, his screams fading into the eerie silence. Ollie rushes to close the doors while David grapples with the tentacles. Grabbing an axe, David swings it, severing the tip of one of the larger tentacles just as the door shuts. Filled with grief and anger, David punches Jim, blaming him for Norm's death. Ollie intervenes, separating the two men, but David continues to berate Jim for his inaction. Inside the store, they regroup and discuss how to explain what happened to everyone. David starts by informing Norton, but Norton remains skeptical. David then invites Norton to inspect the loading dock, where the tentacle and Norm's blood are evidence of their ordeal. ordeal. However, Norton becomes hostile, fearing retaliation from the group for suing David. The rest of the store's occupants overhear the commotion, and David recounts their harrowing experience. Predictably, nobody believes their account. In a bid to provide proof, David shows them the loading dock filled with blood and the severed tentacle. Bud returned, confirming the accuracy of David's claim. Some shoppers begin barricading the windows, but Norton remains unconvinced, suspecting that the scene in the loading dock is an elaborate ruse. He attempts to persuade others to leave with him, while Mrs. Carmody asserts that their predicament is prophesied in the Bible, declaring it to be God's will. Her words attract attention, and she goes as far as terrifying children before proclaiming that the mist demands a blood sacrifice. Ollie attempts to defuse the situation, warning Mrs. Carmody against scaring the people. Meanwhile, Billy overhears soldiers discussing something, but David quickly ushers him away, reassuring him that they'll reunite with his mother. David joins the remaining people, who are arming themselves, with some suggesting the creation of torches. Amanda reveals she has a gun and hands it to Ollie, who possesses experience with firearms. A commotion arises as Norton and a small group decide to venture outside. David tries to dissuade them, but Norton remains convinced that leaving the store is the safest course of action, believing there's no danger in the mist. David requests one of the men to venture out with a rope tied to their waist to retrieve a shotgun from one of the shoppers' cars. A biker volunteers for the task and joins Norton's group. David holds onto the rope attached to the biker's waist until it starts being pulled. It takes 3 men to retrieve the rope, but when they succeed, only the lower half of the biker remains. Jim and Myron work on setting up lights, connecting them to batteries to illuminate the store in emergencies, in case something breaches the store's defenses. Later, a massive flying creature appears at the store window. Soon, more of these creatures arrive, and David realizes that the lights are attracting them. Even larger creatures begin hunting the giant insects. Jim and Myron rush to turn on the lights, unwittingly worsening the situation. The shop window shatters, and the creatures pour into the store. David tries to fashion a makeshift torch from a mop to fend off the creature. Chaos ensues as more creatures enter, and some of the people sustain injuries and fatality. A fire ignites in the store, but David and the others manage to kill several creatures by setting them ablaze. Ollie heroically dispatches one of the creatures, saving Billy. They successfully seal the window hole, and the situation momentarily calms. One person observes that Mrs. Carmody's premonition has come true, as she predicted the arrival of creatures during the night. David goes around checking on everyone, finding that another man has been gravely injured. Amanda observes another person who has consumed an entire bottle of sleeping pill, a concerning sight. David convenes with a portion of the survivors, and they deliberate on the idea of leaving the store, highlighting its insufficient security. David outlines a plan to visit a neighboring pharmacy to gather supplies for the injured before embarking on a journey in his car as far away as possible. Some survivors express agreement with this plan, but Amanda voices her fear that the mist might extend farther than they anticipate. David acknowledges Amanda's concern, but also expresses worry about Mrs. Carmody, who is gradually amassing followers with her religious diatribes, fearing that the situation could exacerbate the group's paranoia. And David is concerned that other survivors might start believing her. Amanda maintains that everyone in the store is civilized and would not resort to barbaric practices. However, Dan points out that fear can drive people to desperate actions in such dire situations. Several hours later, David and a group of survivors set out for the pharmacy. Billy cries, fearful of losing his father, but David reassures him of his return. Carmody obstructs their path, warning that going to the pharmacy will lure the creatures back, bringing God's wrath upon them. Private Jessup joins the group, leaving his fellow soldiers behind in the store. They venture into the mist and successfully reach the pharmacy. Inside, they search for supplies and locate enough medicine for the wounded. However, they discover webs on the ceiling with people cocooned and stuck to it. One of the cocooned individuals suddenly seizes Jim and is revealed to be the military police officer. He apologizes, claiming it was their fault, and then starts convulsing with white eyes. Jim encounters one of the creatures, a giant spider, and Ollie fires a shot, but more creatures appear, shooting acidic webs. One man's leg becomes ensnared by the corrosive webs, causing his skin to melt off. The military police officer collapses and bursts open, releasing hundreds of spiders. The group is overwhelmed and they retreat to the supermarket, unfortunately leaving some members behind. Upon returning to the supermarket, they are in a state of panic and fear. David rushes to Billy and holds him tightly. The following day, David awakens to find Carmody conducting a sermon with a large group of survivors listening attentively. Ollie remarks that Carmody has become extremely persuasive, with the group regarding her as a prophet and believing in her prediction. Jim is fully invested in the sermon, but David's group remains committed to leave it. David decides to speak with the soldier, recalling the military police officer's apology at the pharmacy. They find Jessup and inquire about his knowledge regarding the mist. Jessup claims not to know anything, and they notice that the other 2 soldiers are missing. missing. The group decides to search for the soldiers in the loading dock, but Jim spots them first. They make a grim discovery. The soldiers have hanged themselves. Jessup suggests that they took their lives after he shared what the military police officer had revealed. Jim drags Jessup out to the crowd and announces that he has heard confirmation that the mist is the military's fault due to Project Arrowhead. Jessup admits he heard rumors about the military experimenting with an interdimensional portal. Carmody begins reciting how Project Arrowhead has incurred the wrath of God, branding Jessup as blasphemous. The crowd turns hostile, with some members assaulting Jessup, and one man begins stabbing him. Carmody orders them to offer Jessup as a sacrifice to the creatures in the mist, and the crowd enthusiastically carries him away. Jessup pleads to be allowed back in, but Jim locks him out. Within moments, a colossal, crab-like creature appears and seizes Jessup. That night, David comforts Billy, vowing never to leave him again. Billy implores David to protect him from the monster, and David promises to shield him from harm. The following day at dawn, the group prepares to depart, but Carmody confronts them by the door, accusing them of blasphemy for disobeying and labeling them as sinners. She orders her followers to sacrifice David's group to the mist, and commands them to take Billy as the first victim. A struggle ensues as Carmody's followers swarmed, attempting to kill them. Ollie steps forward and shoots Carmody. Her followers begin to retreat, allowing David's group to escape. They reach the front door and dash through the mist in search of David's car. Ollie reaches the car first, but is suddenly seized by the giant crab-like creature. The rest of the group is picked off one by the giant spiders, becoming separated. David, Billy, Mrs. Repler, and Dan finally reach the car, but the others meet unfortunate fates. David notices Ollie's gun and takes it before starting the car. They pass by the store windows with the remaining survivors watching as they drive away. They head to David's house and discover his wife cocooned in a web. David sheds tears but chooses to keep driving for Billy's sake. They continue on until they run out of fuel and the car comes to a halt. David surveys the car's occupants, all feeling hopeless and defeated, realizing there are 4 bullets left in the gun but 5 passengers. David would be the odd one out. He begins loading the weapon and fires 4 times rapidly. David cries out in agony before stepping out into the mist, shouting and stomping, inviting the creatures to come for him. As he prepares for his fate, he hears rumbling and an armored tank emerges. The fog slowly dissipates, revealing a military convoy carrying survivors and heavily armed soldiers. David collapses to his knees, his cries filled with anguish. The mist clears as the soldiers, armed with flamethrowers and rifles, exterminate the creatures. In a bitter twist, they realize that if they had waited a few moments longer, they could have all been saved.